Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. I think we'll dispense with the usual introductions because this isn't a stream, and we're doing things a little bit differently these days. Tonight is the results of the 2019 European elections. And while I don't usually pay a lot of attention to the European elections and the European Parliament, this year is very different. Not just because of Brexit and the UK, but also because of what it signifies for the rise of nationalism across Europe. And what we're seeing tonight is a really big deal. What we're seeing tonight is something that is literally unprecedented in decades. In Britain, the Conservative Party, also known as the Tories, are experiencing the worst election results that they've ever had in 185 years. They're getting completely wiped out, even in areas that are their historic strongholds, which is really remarkable when you think about it. And if you look at some of the other countries, there have been some disappointments for those of us who are nationalists. For example, in places like Holland and to a lesser extent Germany. But there's also tremendous encouragement, especially in Italy, where La Liga, which had been the junior partner of the governing alliance there, is absolutely crushing it with more than 30% of the vote. And that doesn't even include the additional 10% that went to Forza Italia, which is also a strong pro-sovereignty right-wing political party. And the most important thing, though, even beyond the precedent-setting performance by some of the new nationalist parties, like the Brexit Party, like La Liga, like AfD in Germany, the really important thing is that the mainstream parties, which have been the primary vehicle for the globalists and the Eurocrats to keep control of things, they're falling apart. They're getting obliterated everywhere. We're seeing in numerous places parties that have been dominant parties for decades, for over a century in some cases. We're seeing them relegated to third, fourth, and even fifth place in some countries. For example, the current results at the moment is that the Brexit Party has 21 members of the European Parliament. The Liberal Democrats, which is a nothing party that usually runs in the middle between the Conservatives and Labour, they've got 10. Labour's got 7. The Greens have 5, and the Conservatives are down to 2. So the two primary parties, the two most important parties in England, in Great Britain, have 1/3 the number of members of the European Parliament that Brexit does. Now, that doesn't mean much for the current British Parliament, but it sends a very, very strong signal. And it was really interesting to see my old friend, I'm exaggerating, we've talked like 3 times, but my old friendly acquaintance, Daniel Hannan, who's a brilliant guy, strong Tory. He's been probably one of the most influential English members of the European Parliament for years, talking about how this means that the Conservatives have to allow a general election because the people do not support the existing parliament. And this goes well beyond what we saw in the States with Trump blowing away all of the Republican establishment characters and then defeating the alliance between the bureaucratic deep state and the Democratic Party to win the election. This is part of this massive transition towards nationalism and away from ideology that I've been writing about for the past 8 to 10 years. This is a massive transformation of politics. It's the kind of nexus that you only see once in several lifetimes. And that's why it's really fascinating to follow this and pay attention to this and see how these things are playing out, because this is not the end of anything. This is the beginning of the swinging of the pendulum away from the total openness, from the total lunacy, from the insane optimism of social mood. And it is, we've clearly reached the peak of the pendulum. And so all the stuff that we're seeing, the craziness with equality and inclusiveness and trans this and open immigration that, all of those things are going to be swept away. And this is just the very, very beginning. Let me backtrack. It's not the very, very beginning. Some of us saw the very beginning before, but it is now becoming increasingly obvious to everyone. The globalists cannot pretend that they are the inevitable result of the historical progress anymore. Now, that was never true, and you would have had to be a very, very stupid or very ignorant person to ever believe that for a second. There's no such thing as historical inevitability. But that was the line that they were pushing, and that was the line that a lot of people, especially younger people, were either foolish enough or uneducated enough to believe. And so I'm really happy to see how well things are going for the nationalists. And remember, Europe is actually ahead of the United States in this regard for two reasons. Number one, it has the European nations have a much stronger sense of self. They have a much stronger sense of who they are than Americans do. Americans don't know who they are. They've been de-Americanized, they've been denationalized. The civic nationalism that the U.S. practices, and which I was steeped myself from childhood, is a contradiction in terms. It's something that can't survive. And so what we're seeing in Europe is probably a harbinger of what is in the process of being developed in the United States. Right now, the U.S. politics are still primarily ideological, but it is rapidly catching up to the rest of the world, which is where the issues are no longer so much between left and right, but rather between nationalists and globalists, because even if you're on the left, you might still want to be a part of your country rather than a globalist slave. The right and the left have different visions for how their countries should be ruled, obviously, but both sides still want their country to exist as a sovereign nation. And that's why you see the Brexit Party not just picking up votes from its predecessor, UKIP, not just picking up votes from the Conservatives, but also picking them up from Labour. That's why I thought it was really interesting when the very first results were reported this evening. Up in the north, there were 3 seats that of which 2 were held by Labour and 1 by UKIP. So what you would naturally assume, if you were thinking in ideological terms, you would think that the UKIP vote would go to Brexit and the 2 Labour votes would either stay with Labour, or maybe because the pro-Remain British are upset with Labour, maybe it would go to the Liberal Democrats, maybe even the Greens. But instead what we saw is that Labour hung on to one seat and Brexit picked up the other two. And what that means is even a number of people on the left love their nation and they want their nation to survive as a sovereign and independent state. They might have a very different perspective on domestic issues. They might have a different perspective on foreign policy issues. But there are plenty of patriotic Democrats. There are plenty of Democrats who believe in the United States of America and want it to exist and aren't going to support the idea that the U.S. should just become a minor province in some sort of supranational state. And that's the same that is true, obviously, of people on the British left, of people on the Italian left. And, if you haven't made that mental transition yourself from ideology to nationalism, and, there's another transition that is still to come, which, of course, is Christianity versus Satanism, or Luciferianism, if you prefer, because that's really what underlies the nationalism versus globalism paradigm. But we'll leave that for now. I don't know that we'll ever get to the point of actually voting on that. But from the perspective of someone who grew up during the Cold War and who grew up in the context of all politics being ideological between Republicans and Democrats, between conservatives and liberals, just this transition to a competition between nationalism and global imperialism is a huge change. And occasionally you feel like you have to rub your eyes to really believe what's happening. So, but it's very encouraging, seeing how well Matteo Salvini and La Liga are doing is tremendously encouraging. To see the way that Alternative for Deutschland is, over 10%. These gains are going to carry over, I believe, into the parliamentary elections, because it's not a case anymore where people care more about the ideological issues and just vote for the European Parliament on as a protest vote or as a theoretical vote. Now the issue that matters most is the issue of, do you want your country to be independent? Do you want to be able to make your own rules and your own laws, or do you want foreigners to impose them on you? And that's something that people all around the world are increasingly making it very clear. We want to govern ourselves. We do not want to be governed according to the traditions and beliefs of foreigners. And that's absolutely correct. So, in other news, we are very pleased to say that we're going to be introducing another new show on Unauthorized. The Fencing Bear, Professor Rachel Fulton Brown is going to be introducing a new history show. She's going to be talking about medieval history. She's an expert in it. And she actually picked up, she was just emailing me saying that she picked up the course text. And try not to be too frightened, but if you see the green books right there, that's the Cambridge Medieval History series. And she just emailed me to tell me that she had just picked up a set of them to use as a course book. Now, don't worry, you're not going to have to read the entire 8-volume series. I think she's going to be picking out readings that people can do, and the books can be downloaded from Gutenberg and so forth. So it's going to be a great course. It's going to be something that's going to be the equivalent of a college level course. And so I think that for those of you who are interested, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Of course, it's going to be for unauthorized subscribers only. Most of the stuff that we're going to be adding is going to be for subscribers only. So the stuff that will remain free is the Darkstream, Owen's live streams, a lot of David the Good streams, the gardening streams. And we're always going to have a tremendous amount of free content up there. We're going to have hours of free content every day. But the specialized stuff, whether it's comics, whether it's history, whether it's cooking, whatever it is, that's the stuff that we want to make accessible to our subscribers rather than to everybody and so forth. With regards to the streams on YouTube, there is some reason to believe that it's not YouTube that is responsible, but actually that it's some sort of cyber attack. The reason I'm saying this is that I've been talking to some other people, and they're experiencing some of the same issues. In fact, some of them are experiencing far worse issues than I have. Instead of just getting a few drop frames and so forth now and then, they're finding out that they can't even get their streaming functionality to work at all. And so they're looking into it. We're looking into it. But in the meantime, I think that I'm going to predominantly rely upon this sort of pre-recorded thing. And we'll come up with a system to work out chats, super chats, whatever. We'll figure out a way. I don't think this is primarily related to the ankle biters and trolls, simply because some of the other people that I've been talking to are much bigger organizations, much more popular YouTubers. And so there seems to be something else going on beyond that. We've been seeing some pretty serious hacking attacks trying to get into the Archaven comic site. And we'd noticed that for a while, but it used to be every so often. Now we're seeing it every day. And so it does appear that whoever is trying to take down right-wing sites and trying to disrupt right-wing commentators are increasing their efforts lately. So that's not necessarily something that we can do much about. I think YouTube is probably not going to lift a finger to help us. So there's not really much point in talking to them about it. So the best thing to do is just do what we always do, which is to route around it. And fortunately, we have unauthorized, and there's lots of ways for us to get around this. I think there's one or two other things I wanted to address. Yes. Speaking of premium content on unauthorized, I'm going to be getting started with the book reviews. I will be doing the promised review of Ben Shapiro's The Right Side of History soon. But the first one that I'm going to do is on Haruki Murakami's Killing Commendatore. Looking forward to talking about that with you next time. Not next time. I'm not going to do it as a Darkstream. I'll do it in addition to the Darkstream. But I think that this is the right time to get rolling with those. I think that the video format is actually better for a book review than the occasional book reviews that I've written on the blog. Just because it's a little bit more casual, and all I'm doing is expressing my opinion anyhow. So, but I'll make sure that links are provided in case you're interested in picking up the book afterwards. We'll make them available on the Castalia Direct site and so forth, which is a great way to, if you're going to pick up the book anyhow, why not do it in a way that benefits Castalia and so forth. So, latest news so far, Brexit actually won in the region of the southeast by more than 10 points. The really amazing thing is that they beat the Conservative Party by 26 points. I mean, that's just a total shellacking. And I was watching the little bit of the Sky News reports, and it was really funny to see the various professionals trying to find a way to somehow describe the events as if they were less significant than they are. And finally, one guy just sort of threw up his hands and said, "Look, this is a revolution in English politics. There's no way around it." And what I found really remarkable was that there was a Tory politician on, a member of Parliament who was the defense minister. His name's Tobias something. I don't remember his last name. But it was astonishing the way in which they've learned nothing. He kept going on about how, a no-deal Brexit was not acceptable. And I'm thinking, how do you watch your party get totally destroyed to an extent that it's never happened before in 185 years, and still come out of it refusing to change your tune? And so that's, more than anything else, is what convinced me that this isn't going to be like the 2014 elections where UKIP did very well, but then couldn't translate that into actual general election terms. Because it's very clear that the Conservative Party hasn't learned. Daniel Hannan clearly gets it, but he's a relatively minor figure compared to someone who's the defense minister. And when someone like that refuses to accept that most of the people disagree with you, and that you can't simply keep posturing and telling them that you know best, then the beatings are going to continue. So anyhow, I hope you found this illuminating, and I look forward to speaking to you the next time. This is the Darkstream. I'm Vox Day.